The first cut was not noticed. It was early April of 1851, when the fog still dragged its hem through the cobbled alleys of Barrowfell, a forgotten mining town pressed against the western moors of Yorkshire. The soot-streaked skies had wept through the night, and the stone chapel roofs glistened with dew that smelled faintly of iron. At dawn, the town's youngest gravedigger, Samuel Weems, barely 14, trudged up the narrow slope behind St. Elred's. His boots sank into the moss-wet soil with a soft suction, and his burlap gloves did little to warm the red-knuckled fingers gripping a dented lantern. He had been sent to ready a burial plot. No one had died, but Reverend Harp insisted it was best to prepare in advance. For the Lord moves quickly, he'd say, always with a twitch of the right eye. It was there, beyond the stone wall and the crooked row of larches, that Samuel heard it. Not a scream, not a cry. A wet slicing sound, like fruit skins splitting under too much weight. Then the whisper of movement. Then stillness. He raised the lantern. At the edge of the forgotten field that bordered the old orphanage, known formerly as Our Merciful Sisters' Sanctuary, stood a small boy. Shirtless in the chill, barefoot, trembling. Pale scars laced his torso like a cruel map. Fresh blood traced the line of a razor in his right hand. Samuel could not speak. He knew the boy. Every townsperson did. Edwin Dullard, aged 10. One of the orphans. The boy didn't run. He didn't speak. He simply turned, lifted his free hand, and revealed what he held in his open palm. 4 severed fingers. Small, cleanly sliced. They did not appear to be his. The authorities came before noon, but the town constable, Osric Bellamy, arrived first. He was a nervous man with an allergy to horses, which made his arrival on foot not uncommon. Behind him trailed Mrs. Callow, the midwife, whose knowledge of anatomy was considered near doctoral by local standards. "I've never seen such clean separations," she murmured, adjusting her bonnet. "No hesitation marks." As if... He'd done it before Edwin said nothing. He sat cross-legged in the sanctuary's front hall, hands clean, eyes vacant, as Reverend Harp muttered prayers and the nuns remained unusually silent. The other children avoided his gaze. Some pressed their hands over their mouths. Others shook gently without tears. When asked where he had found the fingers, Edwin simply whispered, "They gave them." The Reverend, a thin man with blistered lips and a voice that cracked on vowels, insisted it was a prank. A child's trick. Edwin was always odd, but Bellamy found the blade tucked under Edwin's straw mattress, a shaving razor, notched, rusted, and inscribed faintly in Latin. Veritas per sanguinem, truth through blood. The orphanage itself had once been a textile hall. Repurposed during the famine years of the 1830s, it housed over 30 children, many unclaimed from plague villages or the moorland work camps. It stood alone at the edge of the town, stone walls high, windows narrow, chimneys always smoking, though the building remained bitterly cold. By 1851, it was said to house 21 children. Only 19 were accounted for that day. The missing names were scribbled hastily into the constable's book. Lydia Branks, age 11, Tobias Elwell, age 9. Both had been seen the previous week. "I'm sure they've run off," offered Sister Meritha, a thin woman with silver-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingertips. "Children do that, you know." Always testing limits, Bellamy was not convinced. He had walked the halls himself, noted the splintered floorboards, the slats on the windows, the thick iron hooks inside the upstairs broom cupboard, too high for coats. He asked to inspect the cellars. Reverend Harp refused. "Sacred records and storage," he explained. "No place for lawmen or gossip." That night, Samuel Weems did not return to his bed. His mother found his boots on the porch the next morning, still wet with dew. His lantern shattered. His gloves gone. The town awoke to silence broken only by a single bell toll. And on the orphanage's door, in thick charcoal scrawled by a trembling child's hand, "She says blood is the key." We have more Barrowfell was not the sort of town that welcomed the unknown. Nestled between the bog-thick moors and the grey slick rivers of North Yorkshire, it kept its head down, its mouth shut, and its eyes turned inward. But in the days following the discovery outside the orphanage, silence became a luxury the town could no longer afford. The butcher, Mr. Swithin, was the first to speak publicly. "Not the first time I've heard of cutting," he muttered to a customer on the morning of April 4th. "2 winters back, that boy, Rafferty wasn't it, came in asking for pig's ears, not to eat. Said he needed them to practice." He tapped his cleaver twice on the block. "I thought he was just simple." By midweek, such stories multiplied. Whispers crawled like ivy across the prayer pews and market stalls. Some claimed the orphan children held secret meetings in the old laundry wing. Others swore that odd moaning had been heard from beneath the floorboards during Sunday Mass. At the apothecary, Miss Lenora Vale shared what she'd kept to herself for months. "One of the little ones, Lydia, I think, came to buy laudanum drops last month," she said, voice low. "Said they were for Sister Agatha's sleep." But her hands were shaking too much to count the coins, and she had a cut along her scalp, stitched with black thread. Homemade, surely. The townsfolk did what small towns always do when discomfort seeps in through the cracks. They rationalized, redirected, and quietly prepared to look the other way. Only the postmaster, a tidy man named Mr. Hale, seemed to grow increasingly agitated. "They get a lot of mail," he noted, frowning. "More than an orphanage should." When pressed, he admitted to memorizing addresses. "All from the same place," he whispered. "Holbray Abbey, Archivum Septem." That's no convent I've ever heard of. Bellamy, meanwhile, had taken to walking past the sanctuary nightly, notebook tucked under his arm, lantern dimmed. He never ventured inside. Reverend Harp had closed the grounds to outsiders, citing spiritual recalibration. But from the road, Bellamy noticed small things. The window shutters now stayed closed at all hours. The children were no longer seen in the chapel yard, and smoke no longer rose from the kitchen flue. Instead, faint candlelight flickered at odd hours from the top floor, specifically the east wing, where the oldest children were housed. He recorded it without comment. On April 6th, the town met unofficially at the Widow Calder's tea room, an unspoken gathering place for unofficial matters. "It's not the children," said Mr. Biddlecombe, the cooper. "It's what they're being made to do." "That's what I say. But by whom?" asked Lenora Vale. "There are only 5 sisters and the Reverend, not enough to watch all of them at once. Someone mentioned the name of Sister Maritha." "She wasn't born here," said Mrs. Callow, stirring her tea. "Came from Cornwall. Brought with her a locked trunk the size of a coffin. Wouldn't let the porters touch it. And Reverend Harp," offered Mr. Hale. "He wasn't always so withdrawn. I remember when he first arrived in 45. He laughed, told stories. Now he looks at the children like they owe him something. Nobody spoke for a while after that. Then old Elias Gow, who hadn't attended church in years, raised a crooked finger. 'They say the sanctuary wasn't built on clean land,' he murmured. 'Before it was a textile hall, it was a debtor's house. Before that, a gallows field. My grandfather said they found shackles in the basement stones.' He paused, eyes narrowing. Said some of them still moved. By April 8th, a new rumour spread, this time among the children not housed in the orphanage. At Miss Brattle's schoolhouse, 3 girls and 2 boys claimed to have seen Edwin Dullard standing beneath the church bell tower at midnight. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. One girl, 7-year-old Marnie Thistle, fainted after claiming he smiled at her, even though his eyes remained closed the entire time. "He had thread in his teeth," she said between sobs. "Black thread." The teacher dismissed it as nightmare-induced hysteria. But by morning, the rope of the bell tower was found unspooled, frayed at the top. No one could explain how it had been reached. The ladder had been locked in the sexton's shed. Among the few who held official concern was Dr. Giles Morvan, a physician of middling reputation but sharp instincts. He'd treated children from the sanctuary over the years for malnutrition, infected blisters, even fractured fingers. He now requested to see Edwin directly, but the request was denied, in writing. A brief, crisp letter from Reverend Harp read, Dr. Morvan, at this time, we believe your examination would be intrusive to Edwin's spiritual healing. We are pursuing internal remedies within the guidance of the Sisters' Chapter and the Holy Rosary. I ask for your patience and prayers. In humility, Reverend P. Harp, Dr. Morvan, insulted and suspicious, kept the letter. He also quietly passed a copy to Osric Bellamy. The final whisper came, not from a human voice, but from the wind through the chimney of the old blacksmith's shop, abandoned these 10 years since Mr. Fowle passed. Children claimed the whistling had words, something repeated, faint but deliberate. Bellamy, despite himself, visited the forge after dark. He stood inside, waited. Nothing. But when he turned to leave, he found 3 small scratches across the inside of the door. Not words, symbols. The same symbols, it would later be discovered, carved faintly into the iron headboard of Lydia Branks's cot. The town was stirring, not with pitchforks or torches, but with dread, with suspicion, with the sense that something had been permitted to grow for far too long, under their noses, behind locked doors and thin prayers. And while no one said it aloud, a quiet consensus began to form among the older families, those whose roots ran deeper than the moors. Children should not bleed in silence, and yet no one acted, not yet. The records concerning Edwin Dullard were as thin as the broth served in the sanctuary's refectory. Born August 15, 1841, in the nearby hamlet of Wickheath, Edwin's mother, Rosalie Dullard, had been a seamstress known for stitching devotional sashes for the St. Walburga processions. His father's name was not listed on the parish registry. Under the paternal column, the entry simply read, absent, presumed deceased. What the town of Barrowfell remembered, however, was Rosalie's voice, or rather, the absence of it in her final weeks. In early spring of 1846, she was seen carrying Edwin, then barely 5, into St. Aelred's, lips bruised, eyes unfocused. She left the child at the altar rail and walked into the vestry, where she asked to see the confessional. She stayed inside for nearly 20 minutes. No priest was present. When she emerged, she had carved the words, "Sew us back," into the back of her own forearm with a tapestry needle. She was never seen again. Some said she drowned herself in the weeping tarn. Others whispered of a sickness that took her from within. The sanctuary took Edwin in the next day. For the next 5 years he rarely spoke. He learned slowly, was unremarkable in lessons, and failed to make any lasting connections with the other children. He was, by most accounts, a quiet fixture, always present, rarely noticed. Until the cutting began. The sisters claimed he had been found hurting himself on several occasions, and punishments were rendered accordingly. Solitary confinement, bread-only meals, the cutting of prayer hours. But the earliest such instance, recorded in the sanctuary's disciplinary journal dated October 12, 1849, was not of self-harm. It was of exchange. Boy Dullard, age 8, did offer 1 small finger prick of blood to Sister Agatha, claiming it was in penance for another child's offence. Said the Lord would sort the guilt through the offering. Entry by Sister Maritha. By late 1850, the entries became increasingly difficult to interpret. A sample page, preserved by Bellamy after copying it from the log. Edwin has spoken of the 5 promises again. He says the voice inside the basin room told him who to choose next. Refused supper. He is calmer afterward. Sister Agatha approves. We have moved the younger children away from the north wing. Undated note, handwriting inconsistent Bellamy, unable to enter the sanctuary officially, turned instead to someone who had. Someone who had left before silence became law. A girl named Margaret Pritchard, now 17, employed as a maid at the town's only inn. Had lived at the orphanage for 6 years. She'd been taken in after her mother succumbed to lung rot, and her father disappeared into the limestone quarries. Margaret did not like to speak of the sanctuary. She rarely even passed by it. But when Bellamy offered a day's wage for an interview, she relented. They met in the inn's kitchen, after hours, over weak coffee and a dying hearth. He was quiet, yes, she began, but not empty. She folded her hands carefully, as if they were fragile glass. He would ask questions at night. Not aloud, he whispered, always through the slats. Things like, if I bled for you, would it hurt me more or you less? Or, does the Lord want us perfect from the inside or only the skin? Bellamy asked what the other children thought. They followed him, Margaret said. Not like friends, like witnesses, like sheep. And then she added something else. I once saw him draw a map. Bellamy's interest sharpened. Of what? Of the orphanage. But it wasn't right. She retrieved it from a bundle she had kept wrapped in oilcloth, hidden behind a drawer in her room for nearly 2 years. It was a torn scrap of hymn paper, the note still visible beneath smeared charcoal. The map showed the orphanage as a crude rectangle, rooms labelled with odd titles. The Basin of Echoes, Wound's Gate, Hollow Choir, Agatha's Spiral, Where the Thumbs Go. Near the bottom, one name had been written over and over, Mother Blade. Bellamy brought the map to Dr. Morvan. The physician examined it with an unreadable face. I've seen this term before, he said at last, tapping the charcoal-smudged label. Mother Blade appears in an 1810 medical pamphlet I once read. 12 cases of sympathetic injury among religious adolescents. It described children who harmed themselves in tandem, without coercion. Group psychosis, they called it. But in one case, a nun claimed they were receiving instructions from an object of silver hidden in a stone wall. Bellamy stared. And what happened to the children? Morvan shook his head. The pamphlet ends abruptly. The author died mid-writing. His final line was circled twice in pencil. They cut not to die, but to listen. Bellamy returned home that night and laid the map on his desk beside the ledger of missing children. 9 names total since 1846. None ever found. He added a note of his own. Edwin Dullard not insane. Not possessed, he believes. And belief, in the hands of the abandoned, is a dangerous thing. Meanwhile, at the orphanage, a new journal entry was written in a tight, unfamiliar hand. It would never be signed. April 9th, 1851. The thumbs have been given. The echoes are louder. The offering will soon be complete. The others feel her smile in the dark. Mother Blade listens with her teeth. Edwin prepares for the 5th. April 10th, 1851. The sky over Barrowfell turned a yellow-grey that morning. A sulphurous tint, locals would later claim matched the colour of old bones before burial. It was the kind of dawn that made milk sour early and stirred dogs to howl at nothing. At precisely 6:03 a.m., the bell of St. Aelred's tolled on its own. The rope was locked, the tower sealed, and yet the iron tongue rang out exactly 5 times, each stroke colder than the last. Father Blythe, the visiting vicar from Withenhill, who had taken shelter in the rectory due to illness, testified in writing, I awoke to the bell. I know the chapel was locked. I passed it not 2 hours before, but the sound was real. My water glass trembled. I recited the canticle of Zechariah aloud, though I do not know why. The moment the 5th toll fell, the air inside my lungs chilled, as if I had breathed in frost from a grave. The letter, now archived in the Barrowfell Parish Box, number 213, remains unsigned, but its paper still holds a faint scent of incense and mint lozenges. Elsewhere that same hour, a girl named Elsie Gath, the shoemaker's niece, wandered into the fields east of the sanctuary. She was known for sleepwalking, but this time she had gone farther than ever before. 3 hours passed before she was found kneeling in the hollow between 2 rocks, her dress soaked, her eyes rolled skyward. In her hand, she clutched something not her own, a small ivory button, embedded with a sliver of mirror. She was uninjured, but when prompted to speak, she repeated only one phrase, the button seized backward. By noon, the unease had settled into the marrow of every sensible man and woman in town. The grocer burned his prayer ribbons. The innkeeper salted her doorstep. And Constable Bellamy, who had long abandoned superstition, returned to the church archives, seeking anything that might make sense of what he now refused to call coincidence. He found it not in scripture, but in a disused record box, bound in twine and left unsorted since 1792. Inside, 3 parchment pages, brittle with mildew. It was a sermon, undelivered, written by one Father Elric Danthy, a name Bellamy had never heard before. At the bottom, a single line stood alone. When the children begin to offer what is not theirs, the blade has awakened. The altar is no longer wood, but will the handwriting match none of the current clergy? No one in Barrowfell recalled such a priest. That evening, Dr. Morven was summoned to the outskirts. The widow Calder, who had been tending to her tubercular sister, reported a strange odour from the well behind her house. It was not the stench of rot, she clarified, nor sulphur, nor even decay. It smelled, she said, like cold iron and burned ribbon. Morven, sceptical but dutiful, lowered his lantern into the narrow shaft. There was no body, but clinging to the bottom rung of the inner stones was a bundle of cloth, wet, frayed, and tied with black thread. It was a child's chemise. Inside the fold, sewn into the hem, was a nameplate, Tobias Elwell, one of the missing. The thread wasn't standard. It was horsehair, braided tight, dyed black with what later proved to be ink, wine sediment, and possibly blood. The garment had not rotted. It was dry within. Morven documented the findings in his ledger. He noted the stitching, the odd preservation, and the sensation that the well, once opened, had become colder than the air around it, a full 3 degrees colder. He measured it twice. The final sign came later that night, April 10th, 11:44 p.m. The nuns of the sanctuary claimed to have gathered in the chapel for private prayer, a rare occurrence, but not unheard of in Holy Week. The chapel itself was plain, crossless by design, and lit only by a wall of votive candles and a single, dust-veiled skylight. But as they knelt, Sister Bernice, elderly, near blind, let out a low hiss and pointed toward the pulpit. "The wall," she whispered. "The wall is leaking." At first, no one saw it. But within seconds, a thin stream of dark liquid began trailing down the eastern wall, beneath the fresco of St. Lucy, holding her eyes on a plate. The substance was not water, nor oil. It ran slow, almost deliberate. It formed no puddle. It disappeared into the flagstone grout. When Sister Agatha approached and touched it with a cloth, the linen smoked faintly. The smell that arose was unmistakable. Old blood and perfume, like a corset drawer in a slaughterhouse. By morning the stain was gone. Bellamy, made aware by a young altar boy who had overheard whispers, returned once more to the sanctuary's gates. He knocked, loud and long, but was denied entry. This time Reverend Harp did not appear. Instead, Sister Meritha opened the iron grating. "You must stop," she said simply. "Some truths are sharper than others." He asked if the children were safe. She did not reply, only closed the gate and walked away. The next morning, Samuel Weems' gloves were found again, this time on the windowsill of the schoolhouse, folded neatly. Inside one glove, a note, scratched in childlike scrawl on a communion wafer. He was the 4th. The 5th comes home tomorrow. The town's sense of reality began to splinter. Mrs. Callow ceased delivering babies. The widow Calder locked her well with 3 iron chains. Even Father Blythe announced his intention to leave by week's end. Only Bellamy remained. He added a final line to his notebook that night, one he circled 3 times before extinguishing the lamp. "We no longer ask what Edwin sees. We must ask, what sees Edwin?" April 11th, 1851. The town square stood oddly quiet that morning, save for the distant toll of iron-shod wheels grinding along the muddy road. A coal cart overturned at the base of Mill Lane, spilling black lumps like discarded teeth across the gutter. The driver, Henry Malks, was not seen again that day. His boots later found neatly placed outside his home, socks still inside. Rumour turned quickly to ritual. It began with the animals. Mrs. Laver, who raised rabbits in the rear of the postmaster's cottage, reported every one of them dead in the hutch. Not torn or poisoned. Opened, each belly slit lengthwise, organs intact. A single button placed inside each wound cavity. They were offerings, she whispered to her daughter, too quietly for the constable to hear. Small ones. For a small god. By noon, the townspeople began refusing to walk near the sanctuary. Children were kept home from school. Windows were shuttered. Salt was poured across every doorstep and gate. A handful of families, most notably the Biddlecombes and the Thistleways, fled in horse carts without so much as leaving farewells. What they left behind became more telling. A rosary nailed into a doorframe, a doll submerged in a bucket of vinegar, and in one home, every mirror covered in linen save one, its surface marked with 3 tiny handprints, as if left in fog. Constable Bellamy, now working by lantern from the back room of the rectory, logged every event meticulously. He diagrammed the town, noting each site of disturbance, dead animals, missing children, untraceable sounds, along with dates and wind direction. A pattern began to form. All signs led back to the eastern wing of the sanctuary, the oldest rooms, once the servant quarters when the building had been a textile hall, now converted to dormitories for the older boys, including Edwin. Bellamy requested formal entry again. This time, he brought a signed order from Father Blythe and Dr. Morven, an emergency clause citing threat to public order. He was allowed in, but only for 17 minutes. The visit, preserved in Bellamy's notebook and later confirmed in the Morven addendum, notes the following. The eastern hall smelled strongly of copper and camphor. The candles in the hallway burned blue. A faint sound, resembling humming or prayer, was heard beneath the floorboards, though no stairs descended. All boys were accounted for, except Edwin. One boy, Jasper Quinn, age 11, had stitched his lips shut with coarse black thread. He was found seated in the laundry basin, smiling. Bellamy's report closed with a single grim sentence. These children are not afraid. That is what frightens me most. That same evening, Dr. Morven received an envelope left anonymously at his doorstep. Inside were 9 teeth, each child-sized, each marked with a small engraving on the root, a symbol resembling a teardrop crossed with a vertical blade. No note, no blood. Just one phrase etched into the inside of the envelope flap in minuscule ink. We only borrow what's needed. Morven sealed the envelope and placed it in a medical jar with formaldehyde, now labelled Unexplained Artifact Number 4 in his surviving files. He did not sleep that night. Meanwhile, inside the sanctuary, something else was unravelling. Sister Agatha, long considered the most devout, was seen walking barefoot in the rain at dawn. Her habit dragged behind her like a burial shroud, soaked and clinging to her legs. She carried nothing but a wooden box, bound in twine. When approached by a nun from the kitchen, she smiled faintly and whispered, "He is preparing." She watches through him now. Then she placed the box beneath the chapel altar and wept for nearly an hour without making a sound. Later inspection of the box revealed the following contents: 5 buttons, a lock of hair braided with silver wire, a shard of mirror scorched at the edges, 1 child's tooth, hollowed out, filled with red wax, a page torn from the book of Isaiah, chapter 49, the verse underlined. "Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands at dusk." The final confrontation came. A woman named Merrin Gorse, schoolteacher, unmarried, known for her skepticism and stiff collars, marched directly to the orphanage gates. In her hand, she held a forged writ of inspection, falsely bearing the parish seal. She had taught Lydia Branks, and she had dreams that week, unexplained ones. Each time, Lydia stood behind her desk, holding out a razor, and each time, Merrin awoke with scratches on her palm that bled through the bandage by noon.
So she went. Alone. What happened next is known only through fragments. A journal entry later recovered from Merrin's home reads, "They are not teaching them to pray. They are teaching them to choose. The sanctuary did not open its gates that evening. By morning, Merrin's bonnet was found nailed to the door, not hung, nailed, through the brim, with 6 thin black spikes. No note. Bellamy added her to the list. She became the 10th. April 12th dawned without birdsong. The sky remained white all day. No shadows, no sun. Reverend Harp was last seen standing before the chapel altar, whispering
to a child who was not there. And in the chapel's apse, behind the sealed organ doors, someone, small, deliberate, had carved a new message into the wood. We are sharpening. The 5th is ready. Bellamy closed his logbook that night and placed it into a locked drawer. He wrote one final line in a separate notebook. One meant not for evidence, but for memory. The town has not broken because of what it sees. It is breaking because the children no longer cry April 13th, 1851. The winds returned that morning. Not violent, but deliberate. They moved in slow, circular paths through Barrowfell's alleys and across the chapel courtyard, curling along stone walls and into window cracks like a long breath held too long. Soot from the forged chimneys drifted sideways, unable to rise. The air tasted faintly of salt and scorched lace. By now, even the skeptics stopped pretending. And it was on that morning, just as the mist began to thin over the moors, that Constable Osric Bellamy opened the oldest drawer in the Barrowfell Records Office. A drawer marked Prior Holdings, Tax Records, Closed Estates, Unclassified. Inside, buried between wool tariffs and ledger disputes, was a map. Not a town map, a building plan. Unmarked by date, but the seal in the corner read, W. Harkress and Sons, Industrial Conversions, Established, 1812 Leeds. It was a conversion blueprint of the structure that would become the sanctuary. Originally labelled as Millworks, Orphan Textile Common, Upper Barrowfell Branch, constructed 1789, closed 1837. Bellamy examined it carefully. The layout was close to the modern orphanage. Stone base, 3 floors, central hearth, chapel addition to the south wing. But something stood out. The blueprint included a sub-level, a floor not present in the current building's known records. Labelled faintly in pencil, Threading Gallery, Secure Storage plus Nonconformist Quarters, closed 1803. A red X marked the northeast corner of the sub-level. Next to it, a faint hand-drawn symbol, 3 intersecting blades forming a star. The same symbol found carved inside Tobias Elwell's button. That same afternoon, Bellamy approached Dr. Morvan with the map. Together, they cross-referenced it against a geological survey archived by the Mining Board in 1844. The foundation structure was noted as asymmetrical, reinforced with unsealed masonry and possible sealed vaults from prior usage. In the margin, a cryptic note. Surveyors report child-size footprints in the sub-brick silt during echo tests. Written off as prank, the handwriting belonged to Harold Malks, Henry Malks' grandfather. Henry, the coal cart driver, who vanished just 2 days prior. But it wasn't until April 14th that the most disturbing artifact came to light. Sister Bernice, by now unwell, bedridden, and muttering in half-finished Latin, asked for a priest. Father Blythe had already fled. Dr. Morvan was summoned instead. She spoke as he checked her pulse. It wasn't the nuns who founded it. She was here long before the sisters arrived. They only named her. When asked who she was, Sister Bernice lifted a trembling hand and gestured toward her prayer box. Inside was no rosary, no relic, no psalter, only a folded sheet of vellum, cracked with age, dated at the top, May 3rd, 1792. It was a letter. To whom keeps the watch, we have failed in our task. The apprentices who remained have broken silence. The blood rites are no longer symbolic. The old basin, once drained and sealed, now fills again during moontide. One of the girls has begun to speak to her reflection. She says it answers, that it shows her where the cuts must go. We have barred the doors to the lower level. I have taken the blade from her hands and buried it inside the organ pipe behind the wall. They must never play that hymn again. If this letter finds another generation, be warned. The children do not remember until it begins again. Elias Wren, Overseer, Threading Gallery Division. The name Elias Wren matched a tax document Bellamy had uncovered earlier that week. A minor factory administrator who vanished in 1792 and was presumed to have fled debt charges. Now it seemed more likely that he had been devoured by something older than debt. Following the discovery, Bellamy attempted to access the organ chamber behind the apse wall, marked in Wren's letter. He was denied by Sister Maritha, who claimed the organ had not been used in over 30 years and should remain in silence as intended. That same night, a boy named Milo Penrose, aged 12, was found in the chapel aisle. He had no memory of how he got there. His back was marked in raised, symmetrical lines, 5 parallel cuts across his shoulder blades, but there was no blood, no scarring, just bruising beneath the skin, as if pressed from within. He spoke 3 words before lapsing into sleep. The blade sings. Bellamy retrieved the organ key by force the next day. He entered the chamber alone. Inside the pipe, labelled G, sealed with wax and black cloth, he found a wrapped bundle. Within it, a narrow blade with no hilt, 7 inches in length, a handle made of bone, not wood, a Latin phrase etched across the flat of the blade's spine. Servitus per disciplinum. Devotion through discipline. Bellamy wrapped it in oilcloth and sealed it inside the rectory's sacrament box. He instructed Father Caro, the only remaining cleric, to bury it beneath the chapel floor the next day. But that night, someone broke into the rectory. The sacrament box was found open. The blade was gone. In the weeks that followed, no new children disappeared. But Edwin Dullard was never seen again. When questioned, the other orphans gave only vague replies. He went through the choir, one said. He stepped into the wall, said another. Only Jasper Quinn, the boy who'd stitched his lips shut, wrote something in chalk on the floor of his room days after the final disappearance. Mother Blade takes her 5th. The choir is full. The harm is done. Constable Bellamy sealed the map, the Elias Wren letter, and the chalk message in a tin box labelled Orphanage Archive, do not open without cause. He never filed it officially. Dr. Morvan retired from medicine within the month, and Sister Agatha vanished during a routine convent transfer to Lincolnshire. Her trunk arrived. She did not. Inside it, only 5 things. A strip of fabric, a cracked mirror shard, a rusted razor blade, a teething ring, and a doll, mouth stitched shut. By July, the sanctuary orphanage was restructured. The eastern wing was walled off. No official reason was given. A new set of nuns arrived from the St. Ursula order in Canterbury, and all prior records were boxed, burned, or buried. No one spoke of Edwin again. But some say, if you walk past the old choir room just after midnight, when the wind is still, you might hear humming. Not a melody, not a song, just the sound of a blade slowly being sharpened against stone. April 18th, 1851. The day began with silence, not the familiar hush of foggy Barrowfell mornings, but something hollow, a vacuum in the air, no crows, no bells, no clatter of milk pails or chapel rustle, only wind moving too fast through still places, and the clink of the lamplighter's pole as it struck a post outside the sanctuary gate, once, and then no more. That morning, 6 children failed to appear at breakfast, not reported missing, not announced. Their names simply went unspoken during roll call. The other children continued eating, calm as stone, their hands folded neatly in their laps. Only one, a boy named Eli Tench, looked directly at Sister Meritha and whispered, "We had to give the rest." The town, though trembling beneath the weight of weeks of fear, had not yet broken. But Bellamy had. He was seen walking barefoot across the rectory floor, dragging chalk symbols across the tiles in silent patterns. He refused food, drank only blessed water. He burned his own notebook on the church steps after midnight, murmuring phrases not written in scripture. Dr. Morvan attempted intervention. Bellamy's response was cold, clipped, and final. It's not possession, it's invitation. And they RSVP through skin. The evening of April 18th was marked by a final entry, one not found in any official archive, but handwritten by a local historian named Thaddeus Crimp, who visited Barrowfell in 1883 while researching a history of industrial child labour institutions. Crimp had interviewed a former nun, Sister Eleanor, who had fled the sanctuary just days after the final event. In her words, "We thought she was a metaphor," an old superstition the children clung to, like stories of headless saints or black dogs. But when they began arranging the hymn books into 5-pointed stars and humming in unison, humming notes I could not recognize, I knew it was doctrine, not folklore. Someone had taught them this. She described the night of the choir, April 18th, when the oldest children, 15 in total, gathered silently in the chapel. No adult summoned them. No bell rang. They simply rose from their straw mattresses, clothed themselves in black tabards, improvised from altar cloth, and filed into the chapel barefoot, carrying nothing. Each child wore a stitched mark over their heart. A nun attempted to stop them, Sister Bernice, who had recovered briefly and returned to duty. She reached out to seize Edwin's wrist. He looked her in the eye, and then gently placed her own rosary into her mouth. Not cruelly, reverently. She sank to her knees, weeping. The next morning, none of the 15 children remained. Their cots were empty, the sheets folded, the beds unslept in. Only the chapel remained unlocked. Inside, the wooden floor beneath the altar had been pried open, planks removed in a neat square. What lay beneath was not soil. It was brick, red and ancient, layered with soot and bone dust, and in its centre, a single silver bowl, warm to the touch, though no fire had been lit. Inside the bowl were 5 teeth, 5 buttons, 5 fingernails, and a scrap of fabric with the word "Mother" embroidered in reverse. Bellamy did not speak again after that day. His final action, as reported by Dr. Morvan, was to take the Elias Wren letter, the Blades wrapping cloth, and a child's broken prayer book, then walk into the sanctuary one last time. He was not seen again. His coat was later found folded on the pulpit. Inside its pocket, a piece of mirror the size of a coin. It bore a child's breath mark, fogged from the inside. The following week, the sanctuary was closed. The building was declared spiritually compromised by a visiting bishop who spent exactly 13 minutes inside before emerging, pale and tight-lipped, requesting immediate transport. It was bricked shut, floor by floor. No rite was read, no cross affixed. The children were relocated to distant diocesan homes. Most of them forgot what had happened. One did not. Jasper Quinn, now mute, was found years later in a convent laundry room near Durham, scribbling the same sentence over and over into the condensation on the window panes. Choir is done. Blade sleeps, but she still listens. Only one final record exists, filed quietly in 1911, during a restoration of St. Elred's Chapel. A groundskeeper, William Fane, noted damage to the old bell tower and entered to inspect. There, hidden behind a collapsed rafter, he found a length of faded cloth tied around the skeleton of a child's hand, bones dry, but still curled in a grasping pose. In the cloth, a silver shaving razor, a ledger page torn from 1851, and a note in blood-faded ink, barely legible. The 5th was not the end. There is a 6th, and she already knows your name. The objects were handed over to the local museum and promptly misplaced in transit. The skeleton was never officially logged, and the chapel was quietly deconsecrated. To this day, locals speak rarely of the Razor Sanctuary. The building itself was finally demolished in 1932, though the sub-foundation proved curiously impossible to remove. A concrete slab was laid over it, flat, cold, lifeless. But every few years, someone finds a button on it, small, bone-coloured, split down the centre, and when held to the ear, some swear they can hear humming. No tune. Just a slow, ritual rhythm, as if something ancient is still sharpening itself beneath the earth. The town of Barrowfell did not die. It simply receded. By 1855, the ironworks had shuttered. The final railway extension, once proposed to connect the valley to the Leeds coal corridor, was abandoned after a landslide revealed a pit of charred animal bones and rusted nursery toys along the intended path. No report was filed. No investigation followed. The mapmakers erased the extension with a neat stroke. The townspeople stopped mentioning the sanctuary altogether. When visitors inquired about the grey ruins on the hill, they were told, that was just an old mill. Too damp to save, but silence has seams, and seams, with time, split. The last remaining witness was Sister Eleanor. In 1869, she was institutionalized at the St. Winifred Hospital for the nervously afflicted. Her diagnosis was ecclesiastical delirium, a term used in that era to describe individuals who experienced hallucinations framed through excessive religious imagery. She spoke rarely, but when she did, she asked one question again and again. Did they open the fifth drawer? No one knew what it meant, not until 1903, when a descendant of Thaddeus Crimp, the historian who documented her interviews, inherited his uncle's papers. Among them was a sketch, an interior layout of the sanctuary's altar cabinet, based on Eleanor's mutterings. 4 drawers had been catalogued during the building's restoration in 1883. All empty, all rotted through. The 5th drawer, however, was missing entirely, not broken, absent. The woodworker overseeing the inventory noted in his journal, "No groove, no track, no hollow where the 5th might have fit, but the others are spaced as if something's been removed. Cleanly, as though it was never there or was taken long ago." The journal was stored in the Barrowfell Parish Archive Box number 326. It has since been lost in a fire. As the decades passed, the story faded. The sanctuary was demolished, as ordered. Its stone was repurposed, some used in the foundation of a newer school built half a mile away. Oddly, that school closed within 7 years. Mold issues, reports of strange drawings appearing overnight on slates, whispered prayers in languages no one could trace. It was never publicly connected to the sanctuary ruins, but in a footnote of a 1919 diocesan report on structural failures in post-Victorian parochial education buildings, the following line appears. The Barrowfell site, formerly Wardsend School, shows foundational distress unexplainable by soil or weather. Substrate believed to contain non-organic material disrupting ground stability. This remains the only known bureaucratic acknowledgement of anything beneath the sanctuary. The legacy of Edwin Dullard, if one can call it that, remains elusive. No confirmed death, no grave, no living descendants, no photographs. Only 2 items associated with him are known to remain in existence. The thread map, drawn on hymn paper, depicting the interior of the orphanage with its renamed rooms. Agatha's spiral, Where the Thumbs Go, and others. This was once held in the personal effects of Constable Bellamy. It surfaced briefly in 1972 in an estate sale in Huddersfield, but was withdrawn from auction without explanation. A prayer card, recovered from the choir room floor after the final disappearance. On its face, a depiction of the Virgin Mary, eyes scratched out with a needle. On the back, written in a child's hand, "Forgive what she made me do. We only cut what was false." This card was kept by Dr. Morven's niece until her death in 1944. She had no children. No heir claimed it. It has since vanished. In recent decades, the Razor Sanctuary has become something of a footnote in the study of forgotten British institutional horror, mentioned briefly in fringe histories, folkloric podcasts, and late-night speculative forums. Most dismiss the case as conflation, an overlapping of Victorian cruelty, religious repression, and mass hysteria. But some researchers have noted a pattern. Across the north of England, between 1830 and 1890, 5 orphanages were closed quietly under vague circumstances. Wormstead Abbey, 1839. Chapel Fire, 12 missing the Westmere House, 1843. Mass silence among all children. Institution closed Edow's Fold, 1847. Collapse of underground chamber during choir rehearsal sanctuary of Our Merciful Sisters, Barrow Fell, 1851. Unlisted in diocesan registry by 1900, Thirlmere Asylum, 1866. Abrupt closure, records redacted, building erased from maps. All 5 shared the same architectural feature. A lower gallery, sealed by the end of the 18th century. All 5 made reference, somewhere in their preserved documents, to a blade, a basin, and a song. And all 5 left behind a single button, unmatched, bone-hued, and carved on the underside with the symbol. What remains is not just a story, but a pattern. The cutting, the humming, the silence that follows. A cycle that emerges every few decades in another quiet place, dressed in different vestments, muttering prayers in unfamiliar tongues. And behind it all, an absence. A 5th drawer that never was, or always was, or waits still to be opened. We look to ghosts and spirits when horror strikes. But sometimes, the horror isn't what stays behind. It's what returns. And when the choir sings again, as it always does, somewhere behind walls too. Thick to hear until it's too late. It won't be new. It will be remembering us. Final reflective line. And still. Beneath the concrete slab where the sanctuary once stood, there are no weeds, no grass, no cracks. Only smooth, unbroken stone. And sometimes, only sometimes it hums.